I'm going to call our panel up so we can talk about some of these other issues that are of concern to so many in our community. So we have Rose Aguilar, who is doing, for media, community, and alternative radio. We have Teresa Sparks, advisor to San Francisco Mayor on transgender initiatives. Ileana Winterhalter, technology, access, and STEM. Please come up so we can begin our conversation. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're going to begin. We'll begin with Ileana and go to Teresa, and then, excuse me, let me sit down, and then to Rose. Each person is going to introduce themselves and tell us about who they are, what they do, and also what is an issue that is really of importance to you. Because after we do that, we're going to circle back and talk about what are the strategies for dealing with this issue, and what kind of help can we provide, and what are the challenges. So why don't we start, thank you, with Ileana, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what issues are of concern.
Hi, everyone. Ileana Winterhalter with AT&T. I think I'm the only corporate voice here today and proud sponsor of the Women's Intercultural Network and CAWA and women's policy issues. I've been with AT&T a very long time. I no longer say how long I've been with the company, but let's say it's been quite a while. There's a number of issues related to communications and great initiatives that are underway to expand access for grassroots women and girls, people living in rural economies. There's a number of initiatives that AT&T is active with across the country, and I'd like to detail those a little later. Elmi, you coach me on how much I should speak now. Let me just introduce the company briefly. AT&T is now no longer just a phone company and hasn't been for decades. We're a high-tech communications and entertainment company. A couple of years ago, we acquired DirecTV. That put us in 18 million homes, and also with our own television product, Uverse. Right now, we're just a distribution channel. We don't have any content, but we expect that our merger with Time Warner will close later this year, and then we'll have content. We'll have CNN talk about media. We'll have HBO. We'll have Warner Brothers Studios. We'll have the Turner Networks. We'll actually have content. And we'll have the opportunity, hopefully, to work with organizations like this organization and others on fresh film products and content for television. So very exciting stuff, lots going on at our company. That's just a quick introduction. I would like to let you know that 1/3 of our employees are women, that we have got over 260,000 employees in the United States alone. That does not count our international employees. If the Time Warner merger goes through, we're going to be a Fortune 3 company, no longer a Fortune 500 company. So we're talking big, really big and getting bigger. Our chairman sees no end in sight. I do want to share one program that we've got that might be of interest for the women and girls in the room. It's a low-income broadband program. We offer broadband as low as $3 a month, $5 a month, or $10 a month. At $3 and $5 a month, you're fully functional on the internet, transferring files and that kind of stuff. The speed and the price depends on what's available depending on your location. We also waive the installation fee and the deposit. There's no better deal in town if there's AT&T service. And I'll talk about some more things a little later.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Sparks. Currently, I'm the senior advisor to the mayor of San Francisco, Ed Lee, on transgender initiatives, and I've been in that position for about a year. Prior to that, I was director of human rights for the city and county of San Francisco, and I did that for about 8 years. And prior to that, I was head of the police commission in San Francisco, and I did that for way too long. It's an interesting time here. It's an interesting time in the country. Being a transgender person, you've probably heard more and more about transgender issues in the media and in the print media and also the spoken media. But most people don't understand them. I mean, I'll say this kind of as an opening statement, as being transgender is not something that's intuitive. It's not something people just go, oh yeah, I get that. It requires education, and it requires knowledge, and it requires an open mind. But I think we've made a lot of progress. I've been working on these things for over 20 years in San Francisco alone, and there's no question with our communities, San Francisco leads probably the world in transgender initiatives. What you may not know in San Francisco is that 20% of the entire population of San Francisco is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. So that's a lot of people. And that's why San Francisco is such a leader in this area, is we have active, we have visible, and we have people who care. And if you happen to look at any marches today, or you were stuck in traffic anywhere in the city, you may have noticed that thousands and thousands of people came out to fight hate, and not only hate about LGBT, but to fight hate about race and religion and you name it. The opposition, the people who were coming here, hated everything except white supremacy. And San Francisco leads the nation in those kinds of fights. Real quickly, San Francisco, as I said, I was asked to talk about some of the issues facing my community. And most of them be summed up with one word, and it starts with a capital T. Since President Trump, and I use that term really loosely, but since he was elected, we have lost about 50 to 60% of all the gains we made during 8 years with President Obama. For instance, he's basically undone the protections we had under the EOC, which means people can still be discriminated against from a federal perspective pretty much across the country in public accommodations, in employment, and in healthcare. He stopped transgender protections under the Affordable Care Act. And healthcare is now very difficult, and as you may have noticed, he stopped trans people from joining the military, which impacts, by the way, the healthcare provisions for veterans who maybe have already served in the military. He stopped the Obama recommendations on Title IX, which is Title IX of the Education Code, which allowed transgender youth, young people, to be able just to use the bathrooms of their choice. And keep in mind, these are kids who probably at home have been using the bathrooms, and when they were with their parents, using the bathrooms of their choice all their life. Now they're going to school and being forced to use a different restroom. It goes on and on and on. LGBT originally, before President Trump was elected, were going to be included in the 2020 census, national census, so that we finally had an idea of how many people there were, how many of those are, how many LGBT people there are. And Trump eliminated it and said, we don't need that. So now, if you can't be counted, you don't necessarily have to be served. And so, in short, what this administration is doing is trying to basically eviscerate the trans community and by extension, the lesbian and gay community. Let me give you, I'll finish with one thing. Texas was mentioned, and the bill in Texas. Let me give you another bill that was passed in Texas. It was the adoption and prohibition. Lesbian and gay, bisexual, transgender people can be stopped from adopting even a relative if, in fact, the person issuing the adoption has religious objections to LGBT people. Which means if a couple dies in a car accident and their grandfather or their brother or sister is LGBT, the state can stop it and put them into state care. That not only includes adoptions, that also includes foster care. So all of these kids who are looking for foster homes can't be fostered by LGBT people. And this was signed by the governor less than 2 months ago. So it's ongoing, it's everywhere, and and I say this every time I speak, is transgender women are women. And we are part of this community, and in many ways you're part of our community because there are many different kinds of women. And so I look to the Women's Intercultural Network to help us figure out how we approach this. And I'll mention a couple of things the city's doing in a few minutes that I think you might want to also participate in going forward. So thank you very much.
You know, when you were speaking, I was thinking about the amazing gains that have been made. Like on the cover of National Geographic, there was a picture of a trans girl. I think she was 8 years old. And then I was watching the NewsHour last night. And, you know, you have Shields and Brooks who've been there for a long time. And Mark Shields was talking about the trans ban in the military. And he said, you know, and then I know about this one amazing soldier man who became a woman. And then Judy Woodruff ended the segment by saying, yeah, Mark, it's just so important to talk about what's going on with the LGBTQ community. And I thought, wow, just to see that on the PBS NewsHour was incredible. But then hearing what you're saying is just so difficult to hear. And it's hard for me to come up with one issue. I mean, we focus on so many different things. And I mean, we have the environment, we have poverty. I think that a couple issues that really need more attention, and I'm really surprised that politicians aren't talking more about it, is gerrymandering and voter suppression. Because it's so important to remember while we're in this time and depressed and crying that almost half of the country did not vote. He got, 20% of the vote? He got a lot of Dems who are union members, and I'm sure that a lot of them regret their votes. Gerrymandering, even if, here's the thing to think about, in 2018, even if the Democrats get far more votes, they're still gonna lose because of how the districts are drawn, right? They're just drawn like this. They make no sense. That deserves so much more attention. Voter suppression and voter ID laws deserve so much more attention. The last time around, I think people were so humiliated that a lot of them did not vote. I don't know why. If you have connections to the Democratic Party, why aren't they talking more about this? I just don't get it. I mean, these issues are so, so crucial. Half the country doesn't vote. If you look, I think this is a really important point because, again, the media always says how divided we are, right? You hear this almost every day. But if you look at where people stand on issues, whether it's the minimum wage, taking money out of politics, healthcare, education costs, raising the cap on Social Security, strengthening Social Security, Medicaid, name the issue. The overwhelming majority of the people are on your side. Overwhelming. The data shows it. Even on abortion, you have the media say the abortion is the most divisive issue of our time. Well, 2 years ago, the Wall Street Journal and NBC did a poll and found that 80% of the population supports Roe v. Wade, the highest percentage in our history. If what happens in these very conservative states is the politicians are passing these laws, the laws that you're talking about, the law that now requires women to buy special insurance if they think they're going to get an abortion. This is so extreme. If this law went to the voters of Texas, there's no way it would have passed. When you had extreme laws going in South Dakota, Colorado, Mississippi, the laws didn't pass because the voters said no. They only pass when these extreme politicians vote or introduce the legislation and then vote on it. So I think it's really important to remember that you are the majority and the extremists are still the minority. It's just that they're loud and they have the microphone. The louder you are, the more the media are going to go into you, go say, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? They're not going to ask you to talk about trans issues for a half hour, right? They're going to grab the guy over there who says, I don't want someone using my bathroom. And it's so important to think about how that affects our psyche. Words affect our psyche. This divided thing, we're not divided. It's just half the country doesn't vote. And so I think that's really important because it's so easy to feel like we are just off a cliff, whereas things have been shifted so far to the right. In fact, I remember, maybe I shouldn't say this in this room, but every time I meet a European, they say, a lot of the Democrats here would be conservatives in Europe. Things have moved so far to the right. Even Bernie is kind of a conservative guy in some European countries, right? And here he's off the cliff. Democrats are off the cliff. So I just think that's really important to think about. And I try on my show to bring these issues up. I mean, when you're talking about all these things that he has done, we keep hearing in the media he's not getting anything done because they haven't been able to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Hopefully their tax cuts, not reform, will not pass, but he's getting a lot done. That's the scary part. The media say he's not getting anything done, but he is. I mean, even on climate change, I loved what we heard earlier about the trees. Charlie, that was so beautiful, about the trees as people. Even on climate change, if you read about solar panels in very conservative states, they're doing amazing things. So I just think, I was thinking about this. What do I want to say? I mean, I could talk for an hour about poverty. We just talked about that on my show yesterday, and how these diaper banks are now popping up all over the country because people can't afford diapers. I mean, this is how bad it is. But it's important to remember that if you, just quickly, I took a road trip to conservative parts of the country back in 2005 when it wasn't in to talk to those people. And now all of a sudden everybody's obsessed with the white working class. But when you have a conversation with people who you think you completely disagree with, on most issues, you can find common ground. So I just think that's important, especially as we feel like what is happening and are we ever going to get out of this?
I think you put that very well, and maybe the one overall strategy, and yes, that deserves a hand. Thank you. The overall strategy is the whole voting, that people are not getting out there because for whatever reasons, we make it easy for people. And for me personally, after the election, I was, I think, clinically depressed for a while. And then you just think, how can it be that in this amazing country that this is who we have selected, or the majority, or not even the popular vote, or this is the person leading this country? And you're right, European people say, what is wrong with you people? And you just go, and people have to go out and vote. One of the things that I decided to do, first of all, I swore I would never work on a campaign again because it's like, I'm too old for this, leave it for the 21-year-olds. And then the more I thought about it, my friend Eleni Kounalakis, who's Greek-American, decided she's going to run for lieutenant governor. And when she told me that, I said, whatever you need, I'm there for you. And then she says, I want to do this road trip to 58 counties. Are you in? I ended up organizing. We've been to 45 counties, including Siskiyou, Modoc, Inyo, Del Norte. But for me, it was almost healing to just go and say, there are really good people. What is it that we're going to do to motivate them to go out there and do something because they care? But when you're talking to, like you said, so many issues, we went to meet with the president of Chico State, Humboldt State. You're hearing about students who are living in their cars. They're trying to get an education and they can't afford housing. And that a lot of the student debt is due to housing costs. All these kinds of issues where you think we have to do something, where it's electing more people, more women in my view, and getting out there to vote. And so perhaps the overall strategy is how do we get more people to vote, but also in your words, and we'll start with Ileana again, when you think about these, like the broadband, that came up in rural communities, that people, let's say you're a person who wants to start a company in Siskiyou County, beautiful, by Mount Shasta. But you set up shop, and now you can't communicate with the world because there's no reliable broadband. So why are people in cities where there is broadband? Because that's where they're getting the services. If we made that affordable or unavailable, perhaps other people will start businesses, will do something that grows the economy of those rural communities. So what are some of the strategies that you would come up with, or you think would be, that you're working on, that you'd be interested in seeing implemented or worked on as you talk about the broadband issue?
Thank you. So, first of all, the industry is fully competitive, right? No one carrier is going to solve all the issues. There's lots of different types of technologies. There's satellite, there's wireless, there's, fiber in the ground, fiber optics, what have you. What I can share is what AT&T is doing and what we're doing not only in California, across the state, but what we're doing across our 18-state service territories. And the feds, the federal government, created the Connect America Fund. And so companies like AT&T can apply for funding. And we chose to do that in a number of our states, including California. We're going to be receiving about $146 million each year for the next 6 years. What we're going to do, what our strategy is to deploy fixed wireless internet across FCC-approved census blocks. So it's the feds' money, so they tell us where we can deploy. But the strategy with fixed internet wireless is going out to rural-based homes and small businesses. So with the funding, and the project is beginning this year, we are going to cover 141,000 homes in the state of California alone. And we're doing that across our 18-state footprint. The other initiative that I think is very important for you to know and to share as people in California, but as members of a national organization with your counterparts, one of the things that the 9/11 Commission recommended to our leaders was that the country create a national first responders network. What we learned at 9/11 is that none of the first responders could communicate. Everybody's on different frequencies. So AT&T won a contract to build a brand new national network for first responders. In the month of July, Governor Brown had a series of meetings with stakeholder input meetings with first responders and in tribal lands to find out from stakeholders what is needed as far as a communications network. And that kind of work is happening across the country. States have the right to opt in to the FirstNet network or to opt out. If they opt out, then whatever network they build needs to be fully functional with FirstNet. But we're going to have, and this is just so surprising, in this day and age of high tech, this country is finally going to have a first responders network. And that's a project, billions of dollars, 10 to 25-year project. So those are two things.
You'll have to excuse me because since I work for the mayor, I'm very San Francisco focused and very provincial in my thinking. But there's a couple issues here you may have noticed that we need help on, the city does, and one is homelessness. San Francisco has become a regional hub for homelessness. The East Bay has backed off on their homeless programs. San Mateo County have backed off on their homeless programs. So what we see is people, and I don't blame them, coming to San Francisco because we have very rich resources for homeless people. This year we're going to spend in the city's budget more than $300 million on the homeless situation in round numbers, give or take a few million. But if you look at what Gavin Newsom did years ago, he formed what's called Care Not Cash to build housing for homeless people. We now house a little over 11,000 formerly homeless people in the city of San Francisco, and the city pays for it every year. But the number of chronic homeless people on the street of San Francisco is constant at around 3,900. So for the last 8 or 9 years, we've had 3,900 people on the street, and over that period of time, we've housed 11,000 homeless people, formerly homeless. So again, it shows that this is a regional problem. This is not just a San Francisco problem. So we as leaders in this community need to communicate with the communities that surround us and say, we've done this and we have models. And if we do it together, it's not going to be so expensive for any one area. And obviously that's a hard sell because they're saying, here's a bus ticket. San Francisco will take care of you. But we need to focus on that because one, we can't abandon these people. We just can't abandon them. Number two is, we have to have help because we cannot be, ever since Ronald Reagan in the 80s suspended mental health care statewide in San Francisco, we can't be the only facility in Northern California that deals with homeless people. And also we've become, and Mayor Lee likes to talk about this a lot, sanctuary city. But we're a sanctuary city not just for immigrants and undocumented. We're a sanctuary city for homeless. We've become a sanctuary city for LGBT people because trans people, for instance, around the country are being so discriminated against, particularly in the Southeast and in other states, that their parents are sending them here with a bus ticket to go to San Francisco. I love you, but I'm afraid for your life here. Go to San Francisco, they'll take care of you. I mean, these are real things that are going on today in your own city. And we need to participate. We as women need to participate in these issues, and I agree. We need to have more women sitting on the Board of Supervisors. We need to have more women chairing commissions. We need to have more women in executive positions in the city. We need to do that. We need to advocate for that, and we need to make that happen. That's something I think we can do with the reach of the people in this organization. Thank you.
And I would add, we need to be specific about the kind of women we want in these offices. I mean, he's appointing so many women, women of color. I just think that's really important. I wanted to mention a book that everyone should get or look up. It's called Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean. And she writes about how the Koch brothers were looking for some kind of economist to fund someone with a worldview that they agreed with. And they found an economist, and his name escapes me right now, but I think it's important to understand what the end game is here. Buchanan, I think his last name is, or was, he's passed now, but he basically said that if the far right, the Kochs, were honest with the people about what they wanted for this country, the people would never go along with it. So what they need to do is ensure that the minority rules. And you ensure that the minority rules by gerrymandering and suppressing the vote. And we're almost there. Because again, in many past elections, Dems got more votes than Republicans, and the Republicans still control the seats in the House. So I think it's really important. It's pretty heavy, but it's a very important thing to think about. Because if the minority rules, if you change the laws to ensure that the minority rules, then what happens to our collective power? Again, it's called Democracy in Chains. She's not getting that much mainstream attention. Actually, the Washington Post, I think, finally did a good review, but she's getting slammed by the right and by libertarians because this was a libertarian economist. So I think that's really important. To your point about poverty, I have a friend who's a teacher in the Mission Potrero, and she told me that if we don't get our act together, if we don't create opportunities for marginalized youth and kids who don't see a future, her kids are going to be homeless in about 5 years. And have you all driven through the Bayview recently? Does anyone live in the Bayview? Okay. Do you? You work in the Bayview? You know, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, but I drove through the Bayview recently, and my radio station is near there. I haven't been there in a long time. I went into the heart of the Bayview. I feel like everyone needs to drive through the Bayview. It's shameful in a city with so much wealth that this kind of poverty, that we have this kind of poverty. I mean, in my neighborhood, I'm seeing, well, not in my neighborhood, but Teslas, multi-mansions. I mean, so much money in this town. And yet in the Bayview, you have dilapidated buildings, trash, kids hanging out. What's in store for their future? Right? I mean, that to me, I think is a really important issue, is these kids right now. It's hard enough for the middle class to make it. What about these kids who are growing up in poverty? What sort of future is there for them? And I think we need to talk more about that and connect it to some of the crime that we're seeing. Rather than, let's catch these guys and throw them in jail. Let's ask, why are they doing this in the first place? I know I'm going all over the board. It's just so It's shocking to see what we're doing, to see what we're facing right now, especially in a state like California with so much money and a city like San Francisco with so much money.
Certainly a lot of food for thought, and I was just given a 5-minute warning by Helenia. So in the time that we have remaining, and what we're going to do after this is that in each table, we're going to continue this conversation. So whether it's just the issue of homelessness, transgender youth, opportunities, education, voting, getting more people elected to public office, think about those issues. And I'm going to ask our panelists to maybe in one sentence to how can this audience be of assistance? And we'll start with Rose.
Of assistance? Or what can we do?
What can we do? Like, what do you think we need to do? If there's one thing we can do today or in the next few weeks, or all of us, our collective we. Not just me, Teresa, Rose, and Ileana, but you people out there. What are you going to do? I think it's also, the thing is that we don't just say, oh my God, what a terrible problem. I hope someone solves it. It's like, what terrible problems? What are we going to do in our communities? Whether it's, I'm going to go out and vote. I'm going to go register 2 people. I'm going to encourage someone. I'm going to write a check for $20.18 for a friend of mine who's running for office, because it doesn't have to be a lot. But I think we have to look at it in small chunks, because if you hear these challenges, you think, oh my God, I'm going to crawl in a cave and never come out. But if you think about what you yourself, in a small way, whether it's even saying an encouraging word to a young person, like, you know what, you have a lot of potential. That's probably something that person hasn't heard from a lot of people. So I think we need to think about what we are going to do in our own individual way, to whether it's just one person or to 100 people.
I think mentoring a young child is so, so important. Mentoring is huge. And then the other thing is, on a positive note, we're at an amazing moment right now because of what happened in Charlottesville. Not only that, but you are seeing people take to the streets, I mean, in massive numbers. In front of the T Hotel in Washington, I think it was, last week, there was a group of mostly white people saying Black Lives Matter. And what got me was this older white couple who looked like they were at the theater, and they saw this event and they joined and they said, no KKK, no fascist USA. So I think that's very promising. And one more story just quickly. I was reading about the 2 Black women who were in the van that got hit in Charlottesville. Amazing story. They were not at the action. They said that they don't take part in any actions. They were driving home. And the fact that they saw a majority white crowd saying Black Lives Matter made them stop their van and start to take photos. They said something that I hadn't thought about. If that van hadn't been there, that guy could have killed so many more people. He hit their van. And these 2 women are, I get chills. They say that because so many white people were standing up for them, they are now going to get involved in the movement. So it's just, there's so many things moving right now. And I think this moment, and we're going to do a show about this on Monday. How do we capitalize on this? That's the question. And I think about Huey Newton at the Black Panthers. One of his main ideas was to bring rednecks with blacks. Poor rednecks, poor blacks, poor brown people, and have them work together. And the system was so threatened by that. And I think we need to get back to that place.
As long as we're doing a book report here, let me offer another book that maybe you should read. It's called If Mayors Ruled the World. And this is a book that talks about local action and local communities. And the mayor of San Francisco, in summer of last year, in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, formed a group called Mayors Against Discrimination, MAD, M-A-D. And MAD was formed, and immediately 26 cities from across the United States joined. 26. And that was within like the first month. And so they're there to fight against discrimination within their local jurisdictions. What we found is it's easier to fight discrimination locally than it is at a statewide or nationally, because they're different issues. They're on the street issues. They're issues people can see. And so consequently, he formed that. Mr. Trump was inaugurated on January 20th. Today, we have 278 cities across the United States who are part of MAD, and they are working at the local level to pass ordinances, because if you have a strong local ordinance, it's not preempted by the federal government. And so you can pass local ordinances in local cities, in local communities, in local villages that will protect your citizens. You don't necessarily have to rely on the federal government. So that's something you might think about. And if you start contacting people in your networks outside of San Francisco, talk about this. It's something that can really, really spark imagination and really create a movement. Thank you.
Oh man, that's not fair. I'd like to talk for 30 minutes. So I would say, as far as what you could do, I'd say this organization is already doing it, at least as far as it relates to increasing communications access. I want to thank the Women's Intercultural Network for their support of Senate Bill 649, which is a piece of legislation that's moving through the California legislature, similar pieces of legislation across the country to bring small cells to communities faster. Today, municipalities can take up to 2 years to approve a small cell. Small cell is what's going to bring the next wave of communications technology, 5G, to communicate to communities across the country. It is a urban-suburban strategy. I talked about fixed wireless being a rural strategy. The small cells are tiny little cells that attach to telephone poles, side of buildings, or to the big macro cells. And that is going to bring the next wave. What city doesn't want the next wave of communications? Because it fosters jobs, it attracts business, it helps education, it helps all of our communities. So I want to thank this organization for supporting the legislation in California. It did go into suspense. We hope it pops out on the 1st and that California will be able to deploy faster.
A big hand to all our panelists, Rose, Teresa, and Ileana, for those thought-provoking. Let's continue the conversation. And here's something to think about that's very positive. So the good news is statewide CEDAW will be heard in the California State Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday. So when you talk about what action can you take, you can write to your elected officials. The chair of that committee is Hannah Beth Jackson, and we can also thank David Chu for helping with that piece of legislation. And that would, it's a state bill to commit California to the principles of the International Bill of Rights, known as CEDAW, the Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women.